welcome everybody from our waiting room into our webinar this month. We are covering what's new, what's next, and how you can participate with our friends Mili Washington. Um, she is our IICRC Standards Director. She's been with the company since 2011. We refer to her as the Standards Queen. So she's the authority on all things IICRC standards. And then we also have Brandon Burton, one of our standards chairpersons. So we welcome them and thank them for their time. As the webinar is going, if you have any questions or concerns, go ahead and type them into the chat box. If it's something I can answer, I'll go ahead and get it done right away. If it's something that we need Mili or Brandon's expertise on, we can wait until the end and get those questions done in our Q&A portion reserved for the end. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Mili and take it away, Mili.
Okay, thank you. And Gavin, if you can advance a couple of slides, that would be great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I do want to just clarify, Brandon Burton is the one and only standards chair, and he will cover quite a bit in terms of participation, engagement in the second part of this webinar. I will go ahead and get started with what's new, that part of the webinar, and just cover a little bit about the standards that have very recently been published by IICRC. The very first one that I want to touch on is the ANSI IICRC S400 standard. It was published earlier this year. It is a first edition brand new standard for professional cleaning, maintenance, and restoration of the commercial built environment. Just want to share a little bit about the standard. It focuses on the commercial built environment and defines frequencies, objectives, results, principles, and practices to clean, maintain, and restore the built environment. As defined by the S400, the built environment consists of materials, building assemblies, structures, furniture, fixtures, and equipment located inside of a building envelope. The standard itself includes several sections, which are principles of cleaning to sort of set the foundation for the standard. And then it goes on to touch on administrative procedures, project documentation, just a touch on safety and health. Our standards don't, really cover that topic. The S400 also covers cleaning processes, cleaning equipment and tools, materials, chemicals, and supplies, as well as quality assurance and quality control, and then closes out with LCCC, which is limitations, complexities, complications, and conflicts. So that's the S400. The consensus body was chaired by Perry Shimanoff and vice chair was Todd Stoneking. It is completed, has been through the entire process and is published and is available through the IICRC web store. The link is there, but we'll include the link also in the last slide. So if you're looking to purchase any of the standards that have been recently published, they're available on the web store. And Gavin, if you can advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. The next one that I just want to touch on in terms of our newly published standards is the ANSI IICRC S700, again, a first edition standard for professional fire and smoke damage restoration. A little bit about what you can expect in the S700 if you don't already own a copy is that the standard describes the principles, processes, procedures for assessing the presence, intensity of impact, and boundaries of fire residues and odors affecting a building, building systems, and contents after a fire event. The fire event can have occurred within the building, an adjoining building, or buildings within the vicinity impacted by an external or internal fire other than wildfires. The S700 also describes the practical principles, methods, and processes, including equipment, tools, and materials for the restoration, cleaning, and fire odor management of buildings and contents. Just a little bit more, the standard addresses contractor qualifications, administrative procedures, development of the restoration work plan, or RWP, as referred to in the S700, as well as documentation of project-related events and compliance with authorities having jurisdiction. Once again, I must stress that the standard does not address all safety concerns associated with performing restoration work, and stresses that restorers should establish appropriate safety, health, and environmental practices to determine the applicability of regulations established by authorities having jurisdiction prior to the use of the standard. That in a nutshell is what the 700 captures. It is a very in-depth document with a host of appendices and informational material that the consensus body thought was important to include with the standard. And so, that's the 700. Just a shout out to the S700 consensus body chair, Bran Lynch, and vice chair, John Pletcher. Thank you, Gavin. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, and so those were the two most recently published first edition standards, but I also want to touch on standards that we have published in the last year or so, still very much new revisions or new standards, and that includes the second edition of the ANSI IICRC S540 standard for trauma and crime scene cleanup. Also, the second edition of the ANSI IICRC S800 standard for professional inspection of textile floor coverings. We have also a brand new first edition ANSI IICRC S590 standard for assessing HVAC systems following a water, fire, or mold damaged event. And then lastly, the fourth edition of the S520 was published a few months ago, and that's the standard for professional mold remediation. And next slide, Gavin. Thank you. And just a little note on things that are approaching the end of the process, or at least we hope so. We are in final approval stages for each of these standards. It would be premature for me to use the word ANSI, so I'm going to stick with just IICRC S300 standard for professional upholstery cleaning, IICRC S410 standard for professional cleaning of the built environment for infection prevention and control, and IICRC S900 standard for professional remediation of precursors, drug residues, and associated chemical waste. So all of these standards have been developed as proposed American national standards. And once we receive our final approval from the IICRC board and ANSI, we will be publishing these standards. With any luck, the timeline is this summer of 2025. Thank you, Gavin. Just a note on public review. This is one that has just closed. We just closed the first full round of public review for the S530 standard for indoor environmental assessment for suspected mold contaminated structures. We received a robust close to 350 public review comments. And so thank you to anyone who has reviewed and submitted comments on the standard. We always believe that your comments help improve our standards. And so, thank you. That process has just closed out, and the consensus body will be reviewing and addressing every single public review comment that has come in, and we will possibly have additional rounds of public review as well for the 530. Next slide, Gavin. Thank you. A little note on just standards that are in the process, right? So some of them are revisions, some of them are new standards, but they're very much in the process. So many projects ongoing all at the same time. So just wanted to touch on that. The new IICRC S100 consensus bodies working on the revision of the professional cleaning of textile floor coverings standard. The same for the S220, it would be a second edition of the professional inspection of hard surface floor coverings. Both of those consensus bodies have been working on the revision. And then the second two standards that you see are first edition brand new standards, the S230 professional inspection of flooring subfloors and substrates, and the S250 professional cleaning and maintenance of commercial resilient floor coverings. Both of those draft standards are well on their way. We will certainly keep you updated and notify as they get ready for public review. Thank you, Gavin. Just a little bit more, a few more standards. There's always a lot going on over here. So the S320, also first edition, professional assessment, cleaning, and restoration of contents. S500, professional water damage restoration, as well as the S550, professional water damage restoration of commercial structures. I will share that both 500 and 550 are in discussions working towards harmonization before either of those standards will be put out for public review. But both of those consensus bodies are working closely on harmonization efforts. And then lastly, I want to touch on the Safety and Health Field Guide for Disaster Restoration Professionals. That is not being processed as an ANSI document. It will be an IICRC field guide, and we expect to put it out for peer review in the next few months. So please be on a lookout for that. Next slide, Gavin. And I think the thing that Brandon and I would want you to take away from this webinar is the power that you hold with participating, with engaging with the standards, and there are many different ways in which you can do that. As you can see on that image, something that we say in standards quite a bit is if you're not at the table, then you may be on the menu, and that's not a good feeling. So, we invite you to participate. It could be as a consensus body member. You could participate as a reserve volunteer, someone who is available to participate if needed, or you can participate as a public review commenter. So I'm just touching on these. I will let Brandon expand on it and talk about some of the opportunities that will be coming your way. And with that, Brandon, I hand it to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mili. So just kind of sticking with the general introduction to this for just a moment, the standards arm of the IICRC has been historically busy. That's probably the best way for me to describe it over the course of the last several years. Really working on more active standards development than we ever have before, and driving deeper into all of the areas of the various subject matter that the IICRC, that the Institute covers. And it's been a very daunting task. It's been just a phenomenal amount of work that's been on the backs of very dedicated volunteers. All of this work that is done in and around standards is done by a volunteer base. And that's really the kind of the string that I want to pull on the most today in this conversation, is just talking about how important that participation is. I often have the same exact discussion with the members of our consensus bodies about how critical participation is, but it's all set up by the fact that these are consensus bodies. And I want to talk just a little bit about what that means for a second, and then dive a little bit deeper into some calls for action for how you can participate. If you're not familiar, an ANSI standard, an ANSI consensus standard is developed using a process that ensures that the document is embodying what is consensus within an industry from a number of different vantage points. First and foremost, the body that actually constructs the document is a balanced body that comprises three different primary interest categories. We ensure that every consensus body has a relatively equal representation from those that actually do the work that the standard is documenting, those that have a direct monetary interest in the work, and those that have a general interest in the work. And it's important that all of those, different interest categories are appropriately represented, so that we ensure that what we're documenting in a standard, is not only a good practice, it's not only, a legitimate practice for how to accomplish the work, but it's agreed upon by those different interest groups or interest categories, that is what is the common reasonable approach to the work and how it is performed. And the reason I share all of that with you is because it stands up, what I would most hope that you will walk away from today with, and it's exactly what Mili touched on a moment ago. Being at that table and representing your perspectives in these standards it's beyond critical, it's paramount. Because as we've seen with many of these standards, once these standards do publish and once they become a part of kind of the publicly available information out there in these industries that they serve, they stand as the litmus test or burden for what is true, what is the appropriate methodology, whether to defend the work that is being done or to prosecute the work that is being done. And it's important that we have that as an industry, because we have very technical, very complex industries. So it's important that that is there, but it's even more important that that language is accurate, that it's correct. So having said all of that, I want to talk a little bit about how you can participate. There's no more important audience, I think, to have this conversation within the audience that is on this particular webinar. So how do you participate? The first and probably most important thing to share with you about how to participate is to stay informed, to understand where you can plug into, what standards are currently looking for consensus body members, what standards are currently available for public comment. How do you engage with either applying to be on a consensus body or participating in that public comment period? And the best way to do that is to ensure that you are checking in on the IICRC's standards webpage relatively frequently, once a month, for example, once a quarter, depending on your level of interest and what is upcoming, to be connected with the IICRC on their social media, whether it's in LinkedIn or Facebook. Those of you that are reading the industry trade publications, CNR, Clean Facts are a couple of the primary ones where we put out press releases and notifications when this kind of stuff is becoming available. But being aware of it, the next step is then actually engaging and being at the table. And again, there are a couple of different ways that you can participate, and I'll touch on those here in a second. But the primary buckets are: do you want to be at the table producing the content for these standards, or do you want to at least be reviewing the content that is being put together by these bodies? And those are the two primary avenues. To give you a kind of a hint at which ones of these are ones that you should be looking out for some ability to participate. There are several standards that in the coming months are going to be available for that public comment period. And I've got those listed here on the screen. These are ones that you can look for in, the next several months, that you'll be waiting for that notification to finally come out that this document is in draft. It's available for public comment. And it's, something that you can begin to participate with on that public comment period.
Brandon,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just a clarification that the 540, 590, and 800 are new CBs that we will be forming. So for application.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So those are areas where you can directly participate into the consensus body process, which I think is what we're going to roll into here in just a second. So if do me a favor, go ahead and jump one slide down for me. So the public review period first. In the public review period, what kind of engagement do you have with the consensus bodies that are drafting the content? So this is kind of what that looks like. When we go into a public review period and the document has kind of completed the consensus body process to an extent, we have a draft document. Your role at that point extends the consensus process by ensuring that the industry at large, or really public at large, has an opportunity to review the entire draft document and then call out specific elements of the document, sections of the document, or requirements of the document, and make a comment back to that consensus body and say, we or I have issue with this particular statement. This is the reason I have an issue with that statement. Here's the resolution I would like to see to that statement. That goes directly to the consensus body. Go ahead and back up one slide for me and stay with that previous slide if you don't mind for a second. Bring that comment back to the consensus body, and the consensus body at that point, they are required at that point to address that comment directly. And it's really important that I stress this, because I want to encourage, as much participation in those public comment periods as we can possibly attain. And a good way to do that is to help you understand that when you do participate in those public comment periods and you do log that comment to the consensus body, you're going to get a response from that consensus body for every single one of those comments. And that response that comes back to you isn't going to be thank you for your comment. That response you get back may begin with that, but it's going to say, we considered this comment. Here's what we discussed as we considered your comment, and we either made change, and here's the change that we made, and here's the exact location where we're going to place that change in the document, or here's the reason why we didn't make that change, and the reasons why we felt it was important not to make that change. So you're going to get a well thought out comment that is going to come from that entire consensus body, that is going to agree to that response to every one of the comments that you make. So the reason I stress all of that is I want to urge that if you spend the time and you spend the effort to review these draft documents, you will have an impact. From your perspective as a stakeholder of this industry, you will have an impact. So it's important that you take the time and produce those comments. If we don't hear that feedback, then that consensus body of 14, 15, 16, 17 people, whatever it is, it's difficult for that consensus body to 100% represent every piece of the body of knowledge and experience that is the totality of our industry. Right. And it's also impossible to have the totality of the industry write a document, right? So you got to find that balance between those two. And that's what that public comment period does. So I really can't urge, significantly enough just how important that participation is. So go ahead and roll forward one slide for me, if you would. So why should you participate? Beyond, just, the fact that it's important that your viewpoint be brought into the consensus body. For me personally, I've participated with standards for more than a couple of decades now, and I have not had a more powerful learning experience in the totality of my industry engagement than I have through standards. It's been a very humbling experience in a lot of regards. It's been a very educational experience in a lot of regards. It's also been the source of probably, the most significant industry connections and friendships that I've ever developed in my involvement in industry at large. So it's a very, very powerful learning opportunity to engage. And I'm just going to kind of paint a picture here for you a little bit. Just imagine spending an hour or two, once a week, with the individuals that are likely some of the most passionate about the industry that you're also passionate about, arguing, debating, and collaborating on what is most important to the industry. And just do that, once a week for an hour, hour and a half, and do that over the course of a 2-year period or a 3-year period. And imagine all of the experiences that you're going to walk away from that with, and the relationships you're going to walk away from that with. And to me personally, that's been probably the most rewarding part of participating in standards is exactly that. The information that I have learned, the models and the methods of thinking that I've learned, the reasoning that I've learned, and the relationships that I've built with those individuals over that power of time, or that length of time. So it's a very powerful opportunity. Secondarily, very similar to the original point that I made, it's your industry, right? It's your industry. And very similar to the conversation that I have with my kids a lot. But you either participate in the development of the solution, or just be the victim of the solution defined by others, right? If you don't take that ownership and that participation, then it's kind of like being on the menu, or being at the table. So it's your industry, you own it, and by that direct participation, you have a chance to really grab that industry and shape that industry. I had a conversation with one of our document chairs just the other day along this line. One of the documents that's currently being developed is a contents standard. A gentleman by the name of Charles Cassani is chairing that effort. And he and I had a really enlightening conversation where both of us kind of realized that, both of our driving motives in participation in standards is that we want to leave the industry better than we found it. right? And what better opportunity do you have to do that than through direct participation in standards? Leaving this industry in an even better place than what you found it, right? So, so I'll leave you with that kind of as that challenge for why. Go ahead and roll ahead one slide for me. So in that public review, we talked a little bit about the process behind public review and how you can directly plug into it. What you're doing in public review is you're reviewing a draft, right? And as Mili kind of referred to a moment ago, and hesitating of putting ANSI in front of an IICRC standard until the process is complete. But you're taking a look at a draft. This draft has been prepared, probably over a 3-year period, maybe a 4-year period, probably by a group of individuals from the industry that comprises, anywhere between 14 and 18 individuals that represent those that do the work, those that have a direct monetary interest in the work, or those that have a general interest as like a consultant or an educator. And they've spent blood, sweat, and tears for 3.5 years putting together a draft document. And now is your opportunity for the first time to see kind of the raw output of that and understand, is this the gold standard? Is this what I would expect our standard to be for industry, or do I have issues with this standard from my perspective, especially as a practitioner of the trade? This is your opportunity to to identify that and share that with that group. You identify the content by line, by page, where in the document your comment applies. You submit that to the consensus body. Then the consensus body addresses every single one of those comments. Whether there are 300 comments or 400 comments or 500 comments that come in from public, they address every single one of those. They either make a change to their document and share with you the change that you've impacted and where that change will exist, or they'll let you know why they feel from their determination as a consensus body a change was not necessarily warranted. And it doesn't necessarily end there, right? You can reply back to that comment if necessary based on the results of that comment. So it's a very collaborative discussion from the consensus body's perspective with the general public to ensure that this is the document that the industry needs. Go ahead and advance one slide for me there. The consensus body itself, when you participate with the consensus body, what does that look like? This is the kind of the fine print of getting more engaged with standards. It's not a small commitment. And part of the reason why the entire industry doesn't sign up to be a part of the consensus body is simply because when you do really look at it, you're making a very, very strong commitment to the industry by participating in a consensus body, which is also, at the same time, my acknowledgement to those volunteers who do undertake this work. It is a very significant undertaking. But generally speaking, if you do sign on or apply to be a part of the consensus body, what you're volunteering to do is to be active with the body from, in some cases, it may be as little as 2.5 to 3 years. In some cases, it may be 4 or 5 years. We've had some consensus bodies that do run for a very long term. You meet with that consensus body typically on a weekly basis. Some do it every other week. Usually those meetings are an hour to an hour and a half each, somewhere in that neighborhood. Usually what we ask of those volunteers is that in addition to that meeting that you're performing on a weekly or every other week basis, usually there's some homework in between. It's not significant, 1, maybe 2 hours a week in between meetings where you're usually drafting some content on your own or meeting with a subset of the consensus body in a subcommittee call to draft content together. When you are in meetings, you're voting on that draft content. And discussing issues that are preventing a vote from successfully carrying the content forward. A lot of active back and forth conversations that happen there. You vote on that consolidated draft, and once the consolidated draft is complete, you then go through the process of responding to public review comments, just like we talked about a moment ago, as a consensus body. And then finally, once the draft has been published, the draft has been publicly reviewed, the comments from public review have been addressed, then you vote and approve the final draft standard, which then goes on for final approval with the IICRC board and ANSI. And then at that point, you've actively completed that process as a consensus body. Usually that consensus body, by the way, does remain in place for a short period of time until that document goes under revision. So you may be called upon as a consensus body after documents actually been published. It's not super common, but it does occasionally happen if there is a white paper that needs to be published or any other particular task we would call on that consensus body for. And then go ahead and advance for me. The consensus body is governed by the ANSI consensus process. The meetings are conducted as necessary by parliamentary procedure. Typically, there's a motion for content, for example, and a second, and there's discussion and there's voting. However, a lot of the time that is spent in a consensus body is usually spent mostly just in discussion. Depending upon the consensus body, usually what happens is, a lot of the content writing happens in, a subcommittee or individually, and it's brought back to the consensus body for discussion. And then we, bring that content forward as a motion, we vote that motion, et cetera. And then last but not least, again, a consensus body is comprised by a balance of users, producers, and general interest. And I'll kind of close with this before I hand it back to Mili. Just a quick definition of who these interest groups are. Users are the ones who actually use those who do the work. So, for example, in the case of an S500, where we're talking about water damage, a user would be somebody who hires the person who does the work or has a financial direct interest in that work that's being done. The producer is the person who is actually doing the work of the standard, right? So that would be the water damage restoration professional in that particular example. And their general interest is somebody who has a direct interest in the industry, but they're not necessarily financially tied to the actual job. So these would be consultants in some cases, depending on the consultancy. It would be a trainer, would be another individual. That'd be a really easy example of a general interest category. And the consensus body is comprised of a relative balance of these three, but definitely not a majority of any one of the three. So that's the consensus body. My call to action to you is to consider, signing up and being a part of a consensus body if you have, the kind of the energy and the drive to directly participate. If that sounds like a bit more than you can bite off and chew, then at least consider participating in the public review process. And read the documents when they're in draft and give the consensus bodies that have done that work the feedback that they need to hear to make those final modifications to the document. And with that, I'll hand things back over to Mili if you want to move to the next slide.
Thank you, Brandon. Just two things that I'd like to add to what Brandon said. One is, public review is a powerful mechanism that gives you not only the right to comment and expect a response from the consensus body, but it also gives you the right to really challenge the standard if there is a deal breaker in there. And there's a whole process involved in that. So just want to stress that it is very powerful because, as Brandon said, participating as a consensus body member is a heavy lift. It certainly is one way to do it, but if it is too much of a commitment, there are other avenues in which to participate. And then the second thing that I want to touch on is submitting an application, which is really the process for it. We do have online applications for standards that are accepting applications that we're kind of initiating the project for. That process does not guarantee you a spot on the consensus body. There is a review mechanism. We review for things like, as Brandon mentioned, balance, any level of dominance on the consensus body, representation, expertise, things like that. And so those are all things we keep in mind when we put together a consensus body. There are times when we receive, I don't know, 75 to 100 applications, and it's not practical to have everyone participate on the consensus body at that time. And for instances like that, we do have a volunteer reserve list. And so you would be, more than likely placed on that if you didn't make it to the consensus body. And then during the development of the standard, if the consensus body needs assistance with a particular section or subsection or topic area, then they would reach out to you. So participate in whatever shape or form that looks good for you or works for you. We encourage you to do that. And with that, now I can get to this slide and really share something quite exciting with everyone. We have some new products in the standard subscription area of our web store. We had lost the ability to offer you organizational subscriptions for a little while, and I'm very happy to announce that those are back. And what that means is that if your company requires more than one subscription as a sort of as a company for you to have access to multiple subscriptions that you can then assign to multiple employees, you can do that. We also offer significant bulk discounts when you purchase more than 10 organizational subscriptions. And so I just wanted to share that. So we have obviously the subscription as a product, which is really just, I think, the best value that IICRC offers for our standards. And a little bit of a nutshell of what a subscription is that it lets you log in anywhere. You can be on the field. You can access online content on your device, your tablet, phone, computer, whatever it is you're using. You can search and sort the standards content specifically for whatever you need and get information on the spot. The subscription allows you to highlight or bookmark. It also allows you to create flashcards, make notes for future references, and then you save that. And then the next time you log in, all of that is there. So it's very helpful in the long run. It also will allow you to download standards to your offline bookshelf app. And what that will enable you to do, and that's limited to 2 mobile devices or 2 computers, and it will allow you to access when you don't even have an internet connection. You could be whatever, and you can access the standards offline. It also allows you to collaborate. So you're able to export and share your notes, highlight with others who have a standard subscription, and share some content, to a small extent. I do want to say that printing is limited to small sections for reference only, and it is, of course, an online subscription that is an annual subscription that has to be, renewed on an annual basis. So in addition to the organizational subscription getting added as an offering, we also now have introduced the idea of specific bundles of standards within your subscription. So if you are only involved in inspection work, you can buy the inspection bundle of subscriptions, and that will include only the inspection related standards that IICRC has. And the same goes for cleaning. We have a cleaning bundle subscription. We also have a restoration bundle subscription. And so that is obviously at a slightly lower cost, and it gives you access to specifically the standards that you need. And I will say that the standards, say the organizational subscription, which is all current standards as well as all historical standards, the advantage is as we complete and publish new standards, they automatically get added to your subscription as long as you're an active subscriber. So you don't have to pay anything additional. If we publish 3 or 4 standards in a given year, you get access to all of those standards. Plus you have access to historical versions. If you need that for, legal purposes or review purposes, you'd have access to that as well. So just wanted to share that. It is live now on the IICRC web store and available for purchase. So with that, I will stop and hand it to Gavin. Just want to also make sure that, that you see that we have these links over here for email if you have any questions, the web store that I mentioned, and then just information on standards. So when we're accepting applications for individual standards, that's where you would go, the information link over there, iicrc.org/standards. We also always put out notification by email, by press releases, social media. So as long as you're, plugged in with the IICRC in one way or the other, you will hear about standards that we're accepting applications for. We typically will accept applications for 2 to 3 months. So there's plenty of time and plenty of outreach to try to reach all stakeholders. As you can imagine, it's a daunting task, but we try. And so, please like us, follow us, or check our website periodically for information regarding public review and applications for new standards. Gavin, back to you.
Well, hey, thanks, Millie, and thank you as well, Brandon. Sorry for flubbing your title there at the beginning, but I appreciate you taking time out of your day to help us with this and do the webinar. And it looks like we had great attendance, a little over 50 people in attendance, which is great. I'm not seeing or hearing any questions or seeing any hands being raised, so you guys must have been thorough.
Gavin, I think I see a question from Wes Stevenson. who says, so does a CB usually have representatives from the insurance carriers?
Oh, yes, yeah, sorry. I was looking at the chat. Sorry. Yes. So, question.
Yeah, and I can take that one, Gavin. So yeah, absolutely. For standards where the insurance industry is a stakeholder, we do actually see participation from the insurance community. We have a couple of individuals that are actually quite active in standards that come out of the insurance community, especially in the 500 series and in the 700 series standards, dealing with fire and dealing with water. So that's absolutely a stakeholder group that fits pretty well into the user category, depending on their role in the insurance community and potentially in the general interest, depending again on their role in the insurance community. So, so absolutely, and it's something we definitely encourage. That's definitely a voice that's very important to have at the table with some of those discussions.
Thank you, and thank you, Millie, for pointing that out. It looks like I'm a little out of practice with this, I think. So apologize for that as well. Any other questions, concerns, compliments? Okay, not seeing anything, so I guess we'll wrap this thing up. If you are one of our certified firms and you're joining in on this webinar, give us about 2 to 3 business days, and you should see the link on your toolbox so you can review this again for any information you're still looking for. And you can also expect to receive your continuing education credit as well. We got a hand raised here from Taryn Merrill. Go ahead and you're welcome to ask your question.
So my question is here we've spent a lot of time to educate ourselves in money, continuing education, keeping our standards current as a certified firm. The IICRC spent a lot of money to change the name to the Clean Trust several years ago and then back to the IICRC. But I'm educated, but the consumer is not educated. They say that to differentiate myself from the other companies as a certified firm and as a master textile cleaner. So when the consumer is not educated, that I have a different standard, a different quality of work, and a different practice personally, how can we educate the consumer? I mean, yes, I have to adjust that in my advertising, and trying to educate the consumer myself and the way I present myself and how would I say? I guess that's pretty much sums it up.
Yep. So Taryn, from a standards perspective, I can share a little bit of insight on that. Holistically with the IICRC, that'd be kind of out of scope for the standards group to respond to, but there is a piece of that we can. One of the things that I know is really receiving a significant amount of effort is standards advocacy. And what I mean by that is that there is a very significant effort being undertaken to ensure that the IICRC and the IICRC standards are being represented in legislation, being represented in those authorities that have any jurisdiction over how work is performed, and through that the IICRC standards and the IICRC brand at large is being represented in that legislation and in those requirements that govern those general interest or those even consumer mandated practices and policies as it relates to the different trades that we participate in. And I think that'll help. Is it the be all end all solution to educating the consumer? No, and I would definitely acknowledge that. But I think it definitely is one of those pieces, and it does help. Having said that, for the overall question about educating the consumer, that would be a little out of scope for Millie and myself, but definitely hear the question.
All right, excellent. Anybody else got anything to add? All right, well, looks like another successful webinar in the books here, Millie and Brandon as well. So I want to thank you again for helping us out and doing this for us. And I have nothing else to add on my end either. Everything's going smoothly here at the IICRC. So Well, until
right.
next time.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Millie.
Thank you.
And thank you for those that attended
everyone.
today.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for attending, and look out for the next month's registration email. That should be coming in the next couple weeks. So enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good
All right.
one.
Take care.
Thank you.